Welcome back to my video series on making your Foundry journals look and work as good as the official modules. This video will focus on utilizing fonts and accurate colors to further improve the accuracy of your journals, as well as making specific changes to match the specific adventure you're adapting to Foundry. As a reminder, I am adapting a Pathfinder 2nd edition adventure, but these steps will work for any PDF of any adventure you have access to. If you have not seen my previous video, I strongly recommend watching that one first. This video will build on knowledge from that one. An additional resource is available for you on my GitHub page at github.com/mustardman42. The link's on screen. Unfortunately, YouTube seems to have blocked the ability to link to external sites in the description unless I send them a picture of my face or a government ID. So you're going to need to type this link out manually. I do apologize for the inconvenience. With that out of the way, let's get started. Once you've mastered the basics of CSS and HTML, the next step is to study an official module. Rule 1 of Foundry in general is that the module developers are always smarter and cooler than you. You could play on the beach for years, but your sandcastle won't match the sand sculpture that a pro would make, and the same is true of the Foundry community devs. Instead of banging your head against a wall, why don't you study what the masters have done before you? With an official module installed, you can open your Foundry directory, navigate to the modules folder, and get to the CSS file the module uses. Opening this file in Visual Studio can be overwhelming, but there's a lot to learn from these files. Be aware that some modules have some strange formatting for their CSS files. I do know for sure that the beginner box is very readable, but some of the more recent adventure paths are a little harder to parse if that's the only one you have access to. One important thing you can learn from the module CSS file is the names of specific style rules that you can use as well, like font size, font family, or text transform. Alternatively, you can press F12 in Foundry to change the CSS in real time and learn how the official module or system accomplishes what it does in Foundry. To do that, click the element picker in the console window to inspect the part of the journal you want to look at. And this does work similarly in Firefox as well if you're hosting remotely. As you can see, when you hover over an element on the page, it will tell you what type of element it is, in this case a H1 heading, what color it is, the font, the margin, and other details about how this HTML element is being styled. You can get some further information looking at the Styles tab here, and you can see exactly what style rules are being applied. You can press the checkbox and see that the style rules are applied or unapplied as you wish. You can even write style rules in this window to test them out and see if you like how they look. It's possible to make your own CSS file without using an official module as a guide, but you're going to have to work a lot harder. An additional benefit of having an official module as a guide is that you should have some font files available in the module directory. You can copy these files into your own CSS folder. If you want your journal to look as good as possible, you're going to want these font files. Since I adapt Pathfinder 2nd edition content primarily, I found the following official fonts match the text of the adventure PDFs. Body text uses Saban Light Standard Roman, although Gelasio is a pretty good alternative that comes with the Pathfinder system by default. Headings typically use Good OT Bold, and the read aloud and side boxes typically just use Good OT. Headings for stat blocks such as items, spells, creatures, NPCs, or settlements typically use Good OT Condensed Bold. Specific adventures often have a unique font for top-level headings, but you can usually find these using Font Finder online. If you own the official module, the font file will usually be included. For the beginner box, the top-level font is Taroka. Once you have a font file, place it in your own CSS folder. I've already got that one. Once the file is in your CSS folder, you should be able to install it in Foundry under the core settings. If you look at the top of the official Beginner Box module CSS file, you'll see that they install their fonts using @font-face in their CSS file itself. I will do the same thing for my tutorial here, although installing them in Foundry seems to achieve the same effect. In your CSS file at the very top, you can type @font-face and then a curly bracket, and then your next line is going to indicate the font family. In this case, we're just going to be calling this Saban. And then you need to replace the URL with the file path for the file that you just moved to your CSS folder. In my case, I'm going to grab it from here in Foundry where I just installed it in the settings. You will need to change the format if the file extension says TTF instead of OTF. That means it's a true type format, and you just need to change this from open type to true type. You'll need to do this for each font that you plan on using with your CSS file. Next, I'm going to show you how to get the exact colors that you need from the PDF file itself of the adventure you're adapting. In my case, I'm using Troubles in Otari, and I need to get that green color that they use for their headings. I open the file in Firefox, and then I press F12 to start inspecting it. If you look here, there's a little eyedropper indicator, and you can click on it. It'll zoom in and let you hover over the exact colors of the page. Once you click on it, it will copy it to your clipboard. You can record the hex code in any text file, but eventually we're going to be making a list of colors in your CSS file as well. I like to keep a journal entry with HTML templates in it, and I like to have a page that shows the different colors that I've extracted from the PDF. After scanning through Troubles in Otari and hovering over each color that I needed with the element picker, I came away with 7 total colors here. I also was able to track down the font used for headings in Pathfinder. The font for Troubles in Otari is Alembic Beta, and I went ahead and installed that in Foundry as well. Now that you have all the fonts you need and the color hex codes, you really have everything you need to start sprucing up your journals and making them look like the real PDF. For the following section, I'm going to show you how to flag your journals to use only the rules that you're writing for that adventure and not pasting these rules onto every piece of text into Foundry. I'm also going to go over some common changes I like to make to text like headings. The first step to this process is adjusting some of the script in WorldScripter and adding flags to your journals. If you're starting with the default output from PDF to Foundry, you might need to move some of the journals around. For example, they often put all of the pictures in one big handouts, and I like to embed these pictures into the actual text of the adventures. You can do this work before or after, but you need to at least be aware of which journals you're going to be exporting from Foundry. You may not need to export the handouts, but you might want to export the adventure toolbox, which has more information about how to run this adventure. And in particular, some of these here at the end are text boxes that appear in the actual text of the adventure in the official PDFs. You might want to move those specific entries into the chapter journals so that you can actually see those text boxes as they would appear in the adventure PDF. To start, you're going to need to add the following script to WorldScripter. You're going to need to adapt it slightly wherever there's an XXX. The capitals and non-capitals do matter, so make sure that you adapt them correctly. You can grab this from my GitHub if you just like to copy and paste it, or if you're a madman, you can simply write what's on screen. The 2 parts you're going to need to change, as I said, are the XXX. I recommend just changing this to the abbreviation for whatever adventure you're adapting. Since I'm adapting Troubles in Otari, the XXX for me is going to be TIO capital and then TIO lowercase. And you need to make sure that you change it in both sections of code, and it needs to match exactly. Woo. Save changes and reload. For the next section, you are going to be exporting each of the journal entries that you're going to be including in this adventure style that you're going to write. You need to make a copy of those files and not delete them if you've done any editing. If you're working with just the raw PDF to Foundry, it's not as important because you can always re-import the adventure. But if you've done any work and you don't want that work to be deleted somehow, back up these exported JSON files. Don't want to know how much work I had to redo because I re-imported a file and didn't have a backup. You simply press Export Data and choose where to save it. For each file you're including in the adventure, you're going to open it in Visual Studio and you're going to be putting in a very, very small bit of code into each file. The best way to get to where you're putting this code is to hover over the pages. It should be like the 4th row, and there's a little arrow here. When you collapse that, that collapses most of the file. And you can see right here, this flags entry is what we want to copy and paste into. The code we're going to copy is very, very small. It simply adds core is XXX and sets that to true. If you paste it in directly from my CSS file, it should be spaced correctly so that you don't need to adjust the indent at all. But you will need to adjust the XXX like we did before. Once you've changed the XXX to the correct abbreviation, you're going to save the file and you're going to be re-importing this file into Foundry. Since I only exported chapter 1, I'm only going to import chapter 1. You choose the exact same file. Again, make sure you have a backup. And now the file in Foundry is going to have that flag that we just set. Next, we're going to list some variables. These make it so that if you make a mistake, you only need to correct that mistake in one location instead of all over the code. And this is especially useful if for some reason you don't want to use the official fonts, but you think you might want to get them later. In that case, you can simply write a variable for what font to use in the meantime, and then later, if you change that variable, it'll change the font everywhere else you use that variable in your CSS file. We're going to create a new rule for elements with the class that we gave the journals in World Scripter, which in our case is TIO. Make sure you include the period, which indicates that this is a class, an HTML class. Under this, we're going to name a variable and give it a value. And in this case, we want to get the color of the readout text. This is where we're going to grab those hex codes from before. Once you've pasted the hex code after the name of whatever variable you're going to be doing, if you put a semicolon and it's a color, it will automatically show you what color it is in Visual Studio, which is very helpful. You're going to want to add each of the colors that you extracted in this way, and then you can name them whatever you want. But I recommend using your adventure abbreviation so that you remember where the source of each color is if you end up using it in a different adventure. I also recommend including any fonts that are going to be specific to this adventure. For example, since we have Alembic Beta installed, I'm going to set a variable for the H1 font for TIO and just set that to Alembic Beta. And this just needs to match whatever the font family is up where you put the @fontface entry in your CSS file so that Foundry knows where to look when it runs into this variable. I went ahead and listed all the variables I plan on using, and now it's time to write some rules using these variables. We're going to adapt the readout box that we used in our previous video. Here's what that code looked like as a reminder. The only things that we need to include in these new rules are going to be the differences. So we don't need to change the border left or border right. We don't need to change the box shadow, the padding, or the margin. So we can delete those elements. And then in front of the rule, we add the class.to. And then we're simply going to change the variable here where it says var and then the parentheses. That's a variable that's included in Foundry by default. And we just want that to be our new variable, which we wrote just a second ago. Do the same for the paragraph. In this case, we simply just need to change the color of the paragraph text. So we don't need these previous rules. We just need a new rule that says color. And we'll set that again to the variable that we wrote, to green darkest. Now we'll reload Foundry. And you'll see in chapter 1, where we previously had that readout HTML, the color has now changed from black to green to match the green color that we just set in the CSS file. Because we applied the class to the journal entry itself, all entries in this journal have that class. And that means that any rules we write, which would otherwise be very general, will not conflict with any of the other style rules in Foundry. The biggest culprit of this would be headings. Headings are used all over Foundry in character sheets, chat entries, text files all over the place. And we don't want to change every text file, only the ones for this specific adventure. We can even change the text that appears at the start of each journal here, where it says leaving town or getting started. These top level headings can be changed using CSS. Since there are some rules that are going to apply to all the headings, H1, H2, and H3, we can combine the common rules that are going to apply to each heading into one set of rules here. And we do that by just separating 3 different selectors with commas. You just need to make sure that you include .to before each HTML element. So .toh1, .toh2, and .toh3. And these rules are pretty simple. This one removes the border. In Foundry, there's always a red underline to any headings on the top level of a journal entry or even throughout the journal entry, and that bugs me, so I like to get rid of it. This margin and this padding just kind of space some stuff around so to make sure that the heading will have enough room to stand out. The overflow hidden is helpful for me when I have multiple headings on the same row. And the text transform to uppercase, just make sure that anything you type, whether you capitalize it or not, will always appear in uppercase. For the specific rules, you really don't need to change much from what the main master rule up here is going to be. You simply need to change the color, if necessary, and change the font. Now, for the H1 font, as I've already said a bunch of times, it's Alembic Beta, so we just use the variable that we wrote, TOH1 font, instead of typing out Alembic Beta. And similarly, I'm using the variable for green darkest, green dark, and green light, which are 3 green colors that all look extremely similar but are different colors. And then the last thing that I change for each heading is just to make sure that the font size matches right. You can play around with this if you like, but I found that 2 EM is good for the top level, 1.6 EM is good for the middle level headings, and then the lowest level headings, 1.4 is a good size. But like I said, you can adjust these to your preference for however you want them to look in Foundry. Once you've saved your CSS file after all this, you'll need to reload Foundry again. And voila, the top level heading has changed to the font and color that we set. And this is true of all these journal entries. Each one is going to have this font here. And now, instead of doing something kind of weird, what you can do is, if you look at the official PDF, you can see that headings like leaving town, on the beaten path, these are not top level headings, but they do use the same font. These are mid-level headings, so I want to set these to heading level 2. So leaving town, if we just change the level to 2, you can see that it is now the smaller size that we set earlier. Now I'm noting that the color is wrong here, so that's something that we need to take a look at briefly. Let's open the inspector. We can see that this guy here is being styled with Alembic Beta, but then it's gray here for green dark. It says it's not defined. So there must be a problem in my file here. Green dark, not defined. Ah, I see the problem. See, when I wrote the variable, I wrote darker and darkest. And what probably needs to happen is we probably just need to change this to darker, because that's one of the actual names. When we save the file again and reload Foundry again, you can see that it's now the right color. And that's how it works. With this knowledge, you are fully ready to go off on your own and boost your journals into digital works of art, or at least look very similar to the PDF adventures that you're adapting. I expect I'm going to be making a video in the future going over some Pathfinder 2e system exclusive changes that I make when editing the text of an adventure to get even more functionality out of Foundry. I may make some smaller videos as well about specific elements that you're going to find in an adventure that can be hard to adapt with the tools that I've already given you, but that I've found ways to get around. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this is helpful to you. Happy pathfinding, Dungeons and Dragoning, or any system you're planning on running in Foundry.